sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Hi, and welcome to the 2021 Library of Congress National Book Festival. I'm Kevin Young. I'm the director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I'm here with two of my favorite poets, Claudia Rankine and Philip B. Williams, to talk about their books, Just Us and Mutiny. To learn about our authors, check out loc.gov/bookfest. Before we begin, I want to let you know that we'll save the last 10 minutes of this 30-minute live event to respond to audience questions. You can start submitting your questions now, please do. We're here today to talk a little bit about the anthology African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song that I edited. It came out last year from Library of America. And it's an anthology these two grace with their terrific poems. Philip practically ends it, is that right? As I recall. He's young, so he gets to do that kind of thing. And you know, it's been a real honor to put together this anthology. It took about 6-7 years, but I realized in doing it that it's about 1,000 pages, but that really can hardly contain the tradition, which is so rich and so powerful, of which these two poets are exemplars. They are going to read, like I said, they have poems in the anthology, but they're going to read from their new books. And we're going to have a conversation about what they're up to, how they see the tradition, and a little bit about the theme this year. So first, we're going to start with Claudia. Claudia, would you read something from Just Us, please?
Sure, thank you for having me. Hi. I'm going to read the opening poem of Just Us, which serves as a kind of introductory question to the book. What does it mean to want an age-old call for change, not to change, and yet also to feel bullied by the call to change? How is a call to change named shame, named penance, named chastisement? How does one say, what if, without reproach? The root of chastise is to make pure. The impossibility of that. Is that what repels and not the call for change?
Wow, hard to follow that, but we're going to have to. Philip, will you read us something from your new book, Mutiny?
Yes, I'll read a poem called Final Poem for My Father, misnamed in my mouth, Kevin, which you've published in the New Yorker. Sunlight still holds you and gives your shapelessness to every room. By noon, the kitchen catches your hands, misshapen sun rays. The windows have your eyes, taken from me, your body. I reorder my life with absence. You are everywhere now, where once I could not find you, even in your own body. Death means everything has become possible. I've been told I have your ways. Your laughter haunts my mother from my throat. Everything is possible. Father light washes over the kitchen floor. I try to hold a bit of kindness for the dead and make of memory a sponge to wash your corpse. Your name is not addict or sir. This is not a dream. You died and were buried 3 times. Once after my birth, again against your hellos shedding into closing doors. Your face a mask I place over my face. The final time you beneath my feet. Was I buried with you then? I will not call what you had left anything other than gone and sweet perhaps. I am not your junior, but I fell in love with being your son. Now what? Possibility was a bird I once knew. It had 1 wing.
Wow, 2 powerful opening poems. I think I'm going to read one from my new book that's out in a couple days called Stones. I had to check to make sure after those great poems. It's called Russet, and it's sort of later in the book. It's autumnal, or it's about autumn, but it's not so autumnal. Russet. I want to drink the day down. Maybe next the night. First, we'll find our feet the floor. The blue beyond the window returns like a mother after work, collapsing into the living room. I'm home. I'm done being in love with what leaves. Autumn gathers in the trees, russet, then tries not to fall asleep on the cold ground. God, it is hard being happy if you try. Instead, be like this slow yellow. Let go. All right. It's so good to see you all, even from a distance, virtually. I've been thinking a lot about the tradition, and I thought we'd kick off just talking briefly about it. How do you see the tradition at this important moment, the African-American tradition, which is, of course, made up of many traditions, but how do you see, do you think of this as a Black Renaissance, as a particular moment, or do you think this is an ongoing conversation, as Claudia so well puts it in her book?
I think what the anthology makes clear is that there's always been at least a conversation across generations. It's just to see them in proximity helps us to realize that. For instance, to see Sterling Brown's poems and then to later read Douglas Kearney's work, we get to see a kind of progression and conversation across the timeline. And so I wouldn't call it a renaissance per se. I think in 2012, they were saying that was a renaissance for Black poetry. And I mean, if so, it's a very long one. I wouldn't be hateful of that. But I think the conversation is one where, because of the amount of work that has been in accumulation, and also the awareness and the more willingness to participate in understanding what has come before, we now have what can be considered a glossary of everything that we've created and what's to come.
Well said. Claudia, do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with Philip. I think that Henry Louis Gates talks about signifying in the African-American tradition. And I think the anthology shows us that we always are in conversation with the poets that came before us. And so the threads are pulled through. Unfortunately, the history hasn't changed radically enough for the Renaissance to feel like a Renaissance. Sure. Many of the things being explored in the poetry remains tragically the same. And so in that sense, too bad. But it is nice to see the conversation with the earlier poets and the later poets. And that's one of the great things that you organize inside the anthology.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think doing it, I really realized those connections, and you realize you have ancestors who are influencing you and you might not even know, influencing us all. And I think also the centrality of African-American poetry to the American experiment, and indeed to the American literary life, is undeniable, I think, at this point. But I hope that this anthology only reinforces that in the ways that folks have been writing about everyday life and politics and what hurt them and what healed them and what joy they had, and not getting tenure, but also about the moon or Emmett Till, whatever they wished. And I think that was one of the things that I want to make clear, or the poets made clear to me. So it was a real privilege. Claudia, you read the poem, that opening poem, and it's so striking to me that the what ifs in your book. Do you feel like you answer them in the end, or is that, obviously there's a rhetoric there, there's a rhetorical quality, but tell me about that question, which I think is a really powerful one.
Well, we are in a moment where transformative justice is a desire, aspirational desire for the country at large. And the what if is asking for that transformative moment. And so it's not a question of answering it, it's a question of calling forward the questions and the conversations that might allow us to begin the process towards transforming all of the systems of oppression that remain present.
And what a big idea to capture. And you know, in the past you've worked in prose poems, and here it's slightly different. How did you decide, or did it decide for you, the form?
I think the interrogative, the question, and the idea of interlocutors brought forward the essay form. So, you know, the lyric is always at the center of my work in some way, formally. It's not the stringent and exquisite form of Philip's work, but it does inform the essays. And so I feel like the subject matter, the desire to have conversations on the page, meant that the pieces had to be voice driven, and allow for other voices to come in. So in this book, the essay did take precedent.
Beautifully said. Philip, I also love, and you read one of them, all the final poems you have, these final. Well, tell us more about that. Like, why final? Having tried to write many a poem about my father, I always think it's the last one. There's always 10 more after. Tell us about that process.
For me, it was a project of, I suppose, reclaiming some aspect of the often used tropes, metaphors, symbols in poetry, and with the hope to find something new. The idea of the conceit of the book, as in retiring some of these ideas, is also a revitalization project. They're oftentimes treated as odes, or in some way a gentle lyrical chastisement of myself of how I've lacked imagination in exploring many of these often used, and I suppose they're frequented because our loyalty to them brings us closer to whatever kinds of truths it is that we thought we had, but it's been a pattern. So the deer is always a dead deer, and that becomes so cemented in with the idea of, you know, truth is with vulnerability, that I think for me, I wanted to find other ways of digging into that emotional territory and figuring out, okay, if I'm going to write a poem about the moon, how can I exhaust that? What are some of the ways the moon hasn't been spoken about? And what are some of the ways that I've ill-imagined the world in which I lived? And I can even push myself more deeply into the forms. And so the final poems were, in many ways, a wake-up call for me to try something a little more challenging as far as how to imagine the world.
Well, I think it's ironic that they are beginnings in a way. That's wonderful. I want to ask you both about your titles. I mean, such great titles always, but I'm curious about them for this book, for each of you. Where did Just Us, I love, you know, the source of it being Richard Pryor, but where did that come from for you? And then tell me, Philip, about Mutiny.
Well, Just Us was both in conversation with Richard Pryor's joke, but it was also, I wanted this book to point to an intimacy. It was, you know, in as much as it's an American conversation, you can't have conversations that stay with you unless you are with somebody who's speaking to you from a place of openness and intimacy. And I love the phrase resonance, obviously, with justice, but also the idea that, you know, it's just us here, so we can speak freely. And that was the driving impetus behind the title.
Well, and you manage, I think, to make both American and a conversation, just like you did American and a lyric. You expand both of these ideas and make them so roomy in a way that once might have been called named after Whitman or something like that. But you're doing it in this modern way. There's all these other forms within your form, and it's so capacious. I'm obviously an admirer, but in this new book, I think you've really taken it in yet a further direction after your brilliant ones before. So thank you.
Thank you.
Philip, tell us about Mutiny.
Mutiny as a title points to the poems in the book. The book's focus on shrugging off the Western canonical figures that are often used as allusions to or within a work, such as Dante's Inferno, The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, the high modern figures, Wallace Stevens as a go-to, and digging more deeply into using Black culture, African diasporic spiritual traditions, Black folklore as the core to where the inspiration can come from, the historical foundation, the ways to push forward and reimagine our place, meaning Black people in America, without having to rely on those traditions that oftentimes don't necessarily serve us because they don't point to the unique cultural expressions that are part of our everyday lives. So I wanted Mutiny to point to that kind of rejection of what is all too familiar and really embrace the overlooked parts of like Black experience.
Sure. When you have these poems to Baraka and you play with Crow and Jane Crow, and I love that. It's Crow Jane, I should say. Beautifully done. I was going to ask you a broader question before we turn it over to questions from the audience, which is the theme of the National Book Festival this year is Open a Book, Open the World. How have books opened the world for you? I mean, we only have a few more minutes, so we can't tell all the ways. But let's think about, one, or what is there a book that opened the world for you, or just one?
Well, in reading Mutiny, I have to say that, Philip, your poems around just speaking about familial trauma, for example, in that up against the title Mutiny was a way of creating a space of freedom within the self to move forward. And so I feel like I love the way, the poems are exquisite, but I love the way the idea of mutiny becomes like a scent as you're reading. And it stays with you throughout the reading. And so it then opens out possibilities of thought. You stop and you're inside yourself thinking about how the poems sort of butterfly out and what possibilities as a writer there are for you, myself, and in the future. So I feel like every reading experience, when the book offers you that, which your book offered me, allows for an openness that the reader steps into.
Thank you. Thank you. I have with me, of course, Just Us. And what I ended up doing was pairing it with not Citizen, but Don't Let Me Be Lonely, because of the interest in having these dialogues as honest as possible without there being that oftentimes that wall, that defense of whatever the identity is, which is not to say that it's being ignored in Just Us, but there's a way that the expansion and also the humor mixed with the heaviness, which is, part of the complexity of our experience as Americans here. It just felt like the perfect companion piece and an add-on addendum to Don't Let Me Be Lonely. And I don't know how you did it because they're two very, very different works. With Don't Let Me Be Lonely having so much pathos to it, and then Just Us having a kind of clarity that I'm not necessarily used to in any work, particularly poetry, essay, mixed genre. So yeah, those works together in conversation have been really important to me.
Well, thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
Well said, y'all. We're right at 10 minutes, so I think we're gonna hear some audience questions now. I'm sorry if we won't be able to get to all of the great questions we have submitted, but I'm just gonna go through a few. This is from Nick. How do you see the historic poets in the anthology contributing toward transformative justice in their time, which the contemporary poets included may be continuing, or are the latter taking a different approach? The question's about transformative justice. How do you see it in the anthology?
Well, I think the questions began with poets. You know, our canonical poets put forward the questions that are being turned and turned and turned over and over again in order to create a way of rethinking a reality that puts so much in our way. And so I find that all of the earlier poets have given me language to work with and given my contemporaries language to work with in order to find ways of thinking about what's possible in the future. You know, you imagine a future based on the tools that have been given to you as a writer by the great poets that have come before us.
Right, I agree. It's for me, if we're thinking about the idea of transformation from what, so what didn't satisfy, that existed during their time, and how in many ways does whatever that realm of dissatisfaction still exists for us. And not just with the poetry, which is a blueprint for how we can and should think about the world today, but also the mentorship, thinking of Gwendolyn Brooks and all of the poets she's touched who in turn have touched others. I know she has a connection with Patricia Smith, and Patricia Smith is a huge mentor for many young poets. And so it's the work, but then it's also the idea, the communal values. What does it mean to be a poet, a Black poet in the world? That's also for me part of this idea of transforming this, whatever doesn't satisfy, into a place that we can actually exist.
Well, I love that. I mean, for me, I'll just jump in real quick. You know, the subtitle of the book, someone asked in the chat, it's called African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song. And struggle and song really are in dialogue to me. And that kind of question, you know, the song can be a struggle, the struggle can get turned into a song, and sometimes you're just singing, and, you know, the joy is part of that act of resistance, as Toy Derricott so beautifully puts it. And so to me, exploring those kinds of joy in the way that someone like Lucille Clifton, a wonderful hero to me, she, you know, would sign her books Joy, and you knew that it wasn't like, oh, don't worry, be happy. It was like, you have to fight for that joy, and it is an act of resistance. It is poetics and won and hard earned, and so that kind of quality, I think, is part of the transformative quality to that justice. So,
nice, Kevin.
We have another interesting question about Afrofuturism. What do you think about Afrofuturism literature? Will it extend to poetry? I love that question.
I think it already has. I'm not too knowledgeable about it as far as like when I can pinpoint it, but if I just look around like my library, I think one of the books that comes up often as being part of the Afrofuturist poetry, maybe Renaissance or beginnings, would be Electric Arches by Eve Ewing. That's come up a lot of times, I think for good reasons. Nice. But then Yeah, but then also I'm thinking too of how, Afrofuturism is, now relegated to fiction. So what could it look like for poetry? And what I mean is I could be missing other books that are doing similar work just because I'm not too familiar with how to apply that idea and methodology to poetry. But I think it's happening.
Well, and Sun Ra himself was a poet. He wrote great swaths of poetry and philosophy, and really thought about that. And I'm really excited about sort of some of the Afrofuturism we're exploring actually at the museum coming up. So stay tuned for that. Claudia, you have anything
Robert
there,
Newman,
or should
yeah.
we jump to the next question?
I think next question.
Okay, so the next question I see is, the anthology subtitle is 250 Years of Struggle and Song. Can you talk a bit about the poetry in Black music and the ways in which it reaches people in a way that traditional poetry may not? Now, maybe I might argue with that last bit, because I do think traditional poetry reaches us, but how does music reach us? And how do you see it as similar or different than poetry?
Well, that's a hard question because I don't think they're competing genres. I feel as if they both serve us, and there's such an overlap. We remember that Bob Dylan got it wasn't, what did he get? He got
the Nobel Prize in Poetry.
The Nobel Prize in Literature as a songwriter. So, and I think it speaks to his skill as a lyricist and somebody who understands the lyric. I think that good songwriters, when they're really good, the language formally is doing much of the same kinds of things that poetry does. And the lines, they stay with you, they open out to you with the same impact that poetic lines do. And the melody allows you to carry it perhaps in a different way. But I'm very tentative about comparing the two genres.
Yeah, ditto, Claudia.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think you put it so well, Claudia, about not competing. You can have both. And I did want to include in the anthology some of the people who explored that moment. Gil Scott-Heron, for instance, or Andy Razaf, who's wrote during the Harlem Renaissance, or people who also wrote poetry and then recorded songs and wrote songs. So how do you kind of think about that? And at the same time, I had to make a decision very early on not to put song lyrics in, which often are in African-American poetry. It was very hard to not put Bessie Smith in there, and Backwater Blues. But at the same time, she's in there already, and so many of the poets are writing about the blues and writing through the blues. There's other anthologies, including I edited a blues poems anthology, that think about that in more explicit ways.
And she's in Harriet Mullins. Her voice as a singing voice is in Harriet Mullins' work. So yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, we have an interesting question about our libraries behind us. I don't know how to think about it, but I know it's both curated and not curated. It's like, everything that is just came out of the box that went on my shelf is there. And it's poetry. It's like, I've got some Oscar Michaud novels. He wrote a bunch of novels, the filmmaker. What are the sort of surprises on your shelves?
I have
Yours are all backwards. Don't think I didn't notice, Philip, that you're not showing us these titles. That could all be blank. I don't know what's going on. There's like a lot going on in the books. I'm just dying to know.
They're on the other system. There's another. I split the room. No, but I collect books of like artist books. So I have one from let's see. Carrie James Marshall, for instance, the Mastery book.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
there's one about the dandyism, dandelion. So Jack Whitten, whose work inspires
Yeah.
my own. Yeah. So I collect those.
Claudia, what about you?
Well, you know, what's behind me is everything I'm teaching in the spring. I'm teaching a class on poetry movement since the 1950s, and there, you know, Mary Baraka is up there. Nikki Giovanni's in there somewhere, you know, so these are all the books that I want in my presence all the time so that I can very gently reread them before class starts. And on the other side are art books, which stay in my house and don't go to my office.
Well said. I mean, perfect timing. And also, someone had the one question we couldn't quite get to was about Nikki Giovanni. So to hear her shout it out is a wonderful thing. Thank you both for making this such a special conversation. I only wish we could talk longer. I think we're the last of the National Book Festival's events this time, but hope I'll see you all soon in person. And to the audience out there, thank you so much for listening and coming.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.